Welcome to the Dr. Diane Show, where we explore revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. With over 20 years of expertise as a mindset warrior, perspective shifter, and unshakable optimist, I am dedicated to helping you reach your wildest dreams in business, health, performance, and relationships. Learn about the power of thought and how it shapes your life to take risks, change careers, find love, go on adventures, and live passionately with me, Dr. Diane. Get ready for revolutionary ways of thinking, being, and creating an amazing life. The Dr. Diane Show starts now. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Diane Hayden, and you are listening to the Dr. Diane Show on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour where we will explore revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul. On the Dr. Diane Show, we will have experts from around the country discussing cutting-edge topics on longevity medicine, natural health, mindset, and soul purpose to help you shift your perspective and become a mindset warrior like me. This week, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Chadwick Prodromos. He's a native of Chicago, and he received his AB degree from Princeton, his MD from the Johns Hopkins Medical School, served a surgical internship at the University of Chicago, his orthopedic surgery residency at Rush, and a fellowship in orthopedic surgery and sports medicine at the Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. He was a pioneer in surgery of the ACL and served as editor-in-chief of the first and only comprehensive textbook on the ACL for orthopedic surgeons. He served as assistant professor of orthopedic surgery for 27 years at Rush before stepping back to focus on his nonprofit research foundation and regenerative medicine. He is currently medical director of the Foundation for Orthopedics and Regenerative Medicine and the Prodromos Stem Cell Institute. And he is the first author of numerous medical journal publications. So welcome. Thank you for being with us today so much, Dr. Prodromos. How are you?
I'm terrific. Thanks so much for having me, Diane.
Awesome. So we have some exciting stuff to talk about today. Mostly, everything that you're doing with the cutting edge therapies of stem cells. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of questions about this type of modality. And just from the brief, few times that we've spoken and the articles that you've written for us, I wanted to really bring you on and give people the opportunity to hear directly from you a little bit more about this and why you got into it and how safe stem cells actually are, how they work, all of that. So let me just start with asking, what was it about this that piqued your interest? How did you first get introduced to even working with stem cell therapy? And what was it that made you, want to delve into this?
Well, for most of my career, I was a fellowship trained sports medicine guy and operating on knees and shoulders and such. Having said that, orthopedics is kind of interesting because we are entrusted with all musculoskeletal problems, but there is no non-surgical field for this. So there's cardiac surgery and then cardiology and neurosurgery and neurology and so forth. But in orthopedic surgery, it's pretty much us. And we're trained primarily as surgeons. So the point of what I'm saying is that most musculoskeletal problems are non-surgical, but they're not, but our field is heavily surgically oriented. I actually, wasn't always kind of oriented that way. So I do surgery, the textbook on surgery, but I always kind of thought of surgery as a failure of other treatments. I would rather get people better without surgery and deal with surgery only as a last resort. So most of the problems we see don't need surgery. And in 2006 or so, I read about the late Kobe Bryant, who had a procedure in Germany for his knee and seemed to have some benefit. So I have a nonprofit research foundation, as you mentioned, with very smart people working there. So I had my research nurse at the time, Sue Finkel. I said, so why don't you look into this and read about it, look at articles. So we did that for about a year. And it was called Regenokine. It was the predecessor to platelet-rich plasma. It involves taking blood, spinning it down, isolating growth factors, and injecting it. So there was a lot of research, mostly in Asia. We read it, and it sounded pretty good. And I didn't really know at the time. So I said, well, let's try. And so we started to do some procedures. I did my first one in December of 2010, injected some patients with knee pain, not really surgical, and the results were astounding. People just got better right away for something that we really had nothing else to do for them. Maybe cortisone shots, but I never and still don't like cortisone. Cortisone kills cartilage cells. It's just not good for you. So I thought, wow, this is really something. We did the first ones basically for free because I didn't know if this was snake oil or what, but I soon found out that it was really good. So I started doing a lot of it. We started prospective studies through our foundation. So platelet-rich plasma works by having growth factors that help you heal and anti-inflammatory cytokines that quiet inflammation. Well, then I started reading about stem cells, which works sort of the same way. And I became interested in that too. So we started to explore that world. We started to treat people with stem cells the way that they're allowed in the US, and they're very restricted and had some benefit, but it wasn't terrific. But I read about stem cells being done elsewhere where they did more advanced stem cell techniques, and we can talk about this in a little bit. And so I thought, gee, it would sure be nice to avail people of these. So in 2017, the FDA had hearings, and I participated in those hearings in DC. And stem cells used to be legal. And in the 90s and early 2000s, there was all kinds of great research. But then in 2005, the FDA decided it was going to regulate human tissue, which it never had before. And the minute they did that, they kind of regulated it out of existence. I mean, I'm sure they mean well, but they insisted on, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies. Those studies are not things that realistically are done in clinical practice. They're done by pharma companies who they tens of millions of dollars for these things. Pharma has that kind of money. I certainly don't. So kind of things stopped and research stopped, and it was kind of driven offshore. It was in Asia. So anyway, 2017, these hearings started, and I thought, well, geez, they're going to legalize this, but they didn't. And then I said, gee, these things really help people. So I want to explore this. So, that's how I got interested. And I got interested because there were so many studies showing efficacy. And at that point, I think this goes beyond your question to me, but we started to look at where we could do this elsewhere. We went offshore to Nassau, treated some people there with some basic techniques, with the idea that we could do more advanced techniques. The regulatory people there got kind of overwhelmed. This overlapped with when COVID started by that. And they just became non-communicative, and I became a little frustrated because there were better techniques around. We actually published a paper in the US using stem cells the way they were allowed here, which is bone marrow aspirate and fatty tissue without being able to isolate the stem cells and PRP. We published a paper, we had decent results, but not terrific results, and it was a little expensive. So it's kind of like this. There was this terrific technique, proven results, written in the literature, very safe. And I just said, this is available. I want to do what I can to do this treatment, and great alternative to joint replacements and other things for my patients. So that takes you up almost currently, but how the evolution went. And I should tell you that along the way, I had done kind of everything I guess I wanted to do in surgery. I pioneered some techniques in the ACL and wrote this book and did other things. And, I love that work, but I just think this is the future. And I started to back off from surgery more and more to focus on this.
Well, you certainly are unique. I mean, I love the fact that you're a surgeon and you're actually saying surgery is not my first choice, because I think that's like, people don't hear that. Normally, when you're going to a surgeon, it's because they want to get the knife out. So from our perspective, and, the magazines I publish, everything is holistic, preventative, all of that. And this is right in line with that. It's finding another way and really using surgery as a last resort. So I love what you're doing. And I think that's why I wanted to have you on, to just make people more aware of this. I think one of the first questions someone's going to say, it's going to come to mind, is how safe is this really? So let's just jump right into that and address it right out of the gate.
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked. So here's the thing. When you talk to people about stem cells, when you talk to doctors or regulators or FDA people, the dialogue goes something like this. Well, stem cells have promise, but we don't really know if they work, and they're kind of risky, and we're just not there. So let's just wait. Notwithstanding the fact that there have been great success with stem cells. There was a good paper in 2010 for ALS, even, for bad diseases. So here's the reality of it. So we do deep dives into the literature. I have very smart people, scientists, biologists, others working for my foundation. I read about this stuff day and night, but there's only so much I can do. So we took deep dives into this to see, and we published a paper last year. We looked at every paper published in the world's literature and PubMed index journals, which are high quality journals, on autologous stem cells. There's different ways you can get stem cells. You can isolate them from bone marrow. You can isolate them from fat. You can culture them from fat. You can take bone marrow aspirate. So we looked at every paper. There were like 50 or 60 of them, looked at all the data, recalculated the data. We did this for both efficacy and safety. So here's the thing. Stem cell treatment is arguably the safest treatment paradigm that exists. So, and when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. So I will tell you, in this paper, which we published in a good journal maybe 6 months ago, I would say, we found no serious adverse events, none ever reported for stem cell treatment for arthritis. And you see, it's not surprising. Here's why. Drugs, pharmaceutical drugs and drugs do great things, right? But these are chemicals that somebody synthesizes and thinks they might work, and they put them into people, and who knows what the heck they're going to do. And the side effects of these drugs often are found years later. You know, Pepsid has been out there for decades, right? So Pepsid was recently found to be carcinogenic. Pepsid was found to occasionally cause spontaneous femur fractures. I had a patient with that, you know. I was reading about, sunblock the other day, that they found benzene in it, which is a carcinogen, high blood levels. So drugs are tested, but these are chemicals. Like, who knows what they're going to do? Stem cells, you have to realize, stem cells are cells that can become other cells, number one, and they secrete growth factors that help the body heal itself. There's no drug that does this. This is what nature has developed and evolved over millions of years for us to heal ourselves. So why would you think that stem cells would cause a side effect? I mean, it'd be sort of impossible, right? Particularly if you're using your own cells. Now the question arises, what if you're using somebody else's cells, allogeneic cells? So it turns out that adult stem cells, these are not embryonic, but stem cells that occur after birth in an adult, or in like Wharton's jelly or umbilical cords, these cells do not have HLA antigens that cause rejection. So they're not rejected. So, you know, what would you think these cells would do? Well, the issue got confused in the 90s because people were getting embryonic stem cells. And embryonic stem cells have a tremendous capacity to divide. And in some animal studies, they were shown to form something called a teratogen. It's like a sort of a tumor. So people said two things. They said, whoa, geez, these are embryonic, they're fetal, there's ethical issues. And I agree, but I will just tell you, nobody uses these anymore. These, you don't need to use them. Nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but almost nobody. So it's very old news. We certainly don't. So the ethical issues are not a factor. But the other thing is, the idea.
Well, that is amazing. We're going to actually get into more of this. I'm going to have to take a short break. You're listening to the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. When we come back, we're going to explore more with Dr. Prodromos and the amazing world of stem cell therapy. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, we're back on the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. But before we continue, I want to make sure everyone knows how to contact me and learn more about me and my publications. You can find me at www.drdianehayden.com or my publications, naturalnutmeg.com and essentialnaples.com. And you can find more info on my guest today, Dr. Prodromos, at the Prodromos Stem Cell Institute, www.thepsci.com. So welcome back. And we were just talking about a lot of the misinformation about stem cell therapy. You had started to get into the type of stem cells that you use, whether you're using a person's own stem cells and I think what people assume and where a lot of this misinformation comes from is that doctors are using embryonic stem cells, and that is not the case. So let's kind of just go from there.
Yep. So there are some trials using it. And so the basic problem arose, there were ethical issues with abortion. So nobody's using aborted tissue. But the thought was too that because in animals, sometimes these cells divide uncontrollably, people said there could be risks in people. It turns out that even embryonic stem cells, there was a study, there aren't many now, but a friend of mine at Rush did one for ALS and no issues. So even these embryonic cells, which love to divide, have not really been shown to cause tumors. But the cells that we use, and almost everybody uses now, they're called mesenchymal stem cells. So these are stem cells that are partially differentiated. And they just don't form tumors basically ever. There's one report in the history of the world's literature. It was a paper from Thailand in 2010 where they described they injected some cells into the kidney and some kind of a tumor formed. We actually tried to contact these people and we couldn't, and we don't exactly know. So that's it in the history of the world. These cells don't form tumors. It's just not a consideration. And there have been tens of thousands of injections. So that's one thing, put it to bed. Well, what else could they do? How about infections? So I'm fond of telling my patients, and we do thousands of injections, stem cells, PRP, hyaluronic acid, other things. I'm fond of telling them, anytime you stick a needle in somebody, it's possible to get an infection. And actually, cortisone is prone to get infections, not commonly, but it occurs. So these cells actually are used to fight infections. So nobody has ever seen an infection in a joint. Now, I have to tell you, there are things that happen in back rooms and out of the way places by people who are maybe not real legitimate. So, you can do weird things and have weird results. And that takes place, is the same for mainstream medicine. But I'm talking about reputable places properly used. You just don't get infections either. The only infections, and we published this one paper on safety for joints. We have 5 other papers that we're almost done with exploring. We know, I think, more about this than anybody any place because we spent all day, every day researching everything that's been published. So there have been a couple of infections in lumbar discs. Now, lumbar discs, you should know, tend to get infected. Not often, it's like a 1 in 1,000 chance, but even if you do a discogram or put something in, they just do. So the question is, do you get more infections with stem cells than other tissue? And the answer is you don't. And then, intravenously, nobody's ever seen it, which is how most of them are injected. Into joints, nobody's ever seen it. Intrathecally, into the nervous system. We've looked at all of this. So do you get infections? No. Now, could you? I suppose if you did something weird. But do stem cells predispose to infection? Absolutely not. Do mesenchymal stem cells, adult stem cells, predispose to tumors? No. Now, having said that, we don't do these treatments in people that have active cancer because you don't know what's going to happen. But in a healthy person, do they? No. So then you ask yourself, and we are putting this in our paper, we say, all right, so people will say, well, there are some risks. Well, what would you think the risks would be? What exactly is going to happen? Well, one thought is, how about blood clots? Do they cause blood clots? So here's the story. We've researched this extensively, and the only report we could find from any place was a report from China of 2 people who got blood clots in their arms after injections. We don't know exactly where in China they were done. We tried to reach out to them, and they resolved, okay. But there, again, have been tens of thousands of these, and people just don't see it. So, all right, they're not going to form tumors. They don't cause infections. They basically don't cause blood clots. And by the way, we give everybody a little baby aspirin anyway beforehand, sort of just in case. So, what else are they going to do? Well, so let me just tell you, there's a distinction, and we draw this in our paper, between the stem cells themselves and the delivery of the stem cells. And this is where it gets a little complicated. So injecting it intravenously, properly done, and I'm not talking about minor side effects. I'm not talking about being a little lightheaded or getting a little headache or something like that. I'm talking about a serious adverse event. Haven't seen it. Now, there's a whole nother side to this, and I won't get too deeply into this, but these are injected into the eye for retinal disease, where they have amazing results. They're injected into the corpus cavernosum of the penis for ED with good results. They're injected intrathecally by lumbar puncture. We just did a compassionate use treatment with FDA approval of a patient with ALS, actually, for this. So if you are sticking needles into other places, in the heart, they are given by cardiac catheterization, into the brain by the carotids. So when you start sticking needles into the heart, or when you start sticking needles into the eye, there is a certain degree of potential side effects that can occur just because you're sticking a needle in there. But these are not stem cell side effects. These are a side effect of sticking a needle in there. And even at that, if you do it properly, nothing bad should happen.
It's amazing to me that people, like all of the different things that you're coming up with, I'm sure are questions that people have asked you, over the years about all these concerns that they have. It's amazing to me that people will just take pharmaceutical drugs and sign up for surgery or a vaccine, whatever, without even thinking like, oh, what are my risks? But they're scrutinizing something like this because it's novel, when to me it's safer than probably all the other things that I just mentioned.
It is. And I should tell you that in addition to looking at scientific literature databases, we looked in the lay press. We did Google searches. We looked in legal databases, looking for lawsuits for things, just everything that we could find. And there's almost nothing. And I'll tell you, let me just say this. So there are a few things that get circulated that put people off about stem cells that shouldn't. One of them is, so it was in the lay press, I'd say a year ago, that half a dozen patients in Portugal got stem cell tumors in their cervical spine. So we looked into this. And so what happened was some doctors there took a biopsy, took a piece of tissue from the inside of the nose. Now there are some stem cells in there, but there's a lot of other tissue in there. So they took this tissue and injected it into the spine. And 6 or 7 years later, what happened was some of these people got mucus cysts. So this is a form of a tumor. It's not cancer, form of a tumor. But these were not from the stem cells. These were from the mucus cells in the nose that were put in the cervical spine. So this got put out there as a stem cell problem, and it's not. There were several patients in Florida who were blinded by stem cells injected into the eye. And without getting into the details, I will tell you that the person that did it was not a physician. And let's just say that the procedure was not consistent with best practice. But there are lots of papers published by ophthalmologists who have injected into the eye and the retina without problems. There was in August, and I'm telling you the things that people cite to me as well. They get confused with stem cell problems. In August of 2018, there were 12 people who got fecal bacterial infections from tainted cord blood. Happily, nobody died. These are not stem cell treatments either. This is tissue that was tainted. They traced it to a place in California. It was a dirty lab. Now, the same thing happened actually with cortisone some years before. In fact, a person was convicted of, I think, manslaughter or something for it. So again, if you have tissue, and again, if you're going to be using tissue from a tissue bank, you better make darn sure that it's a good tissue bank and a high quality one. So these people were not following procedures and infected tissue, but that can happen with drugs too, and it has happened. So those three things are cited a lot. There's 5 things that are cited. The fourth one is in California. They said, well, stem cells produced growths in a patient's face. So there's a plastic surgeon who injected fat in the subcutaneous tissue. He also injected other things, a little strangely, demineralized bone matrix, I believe, insulin, other stuff. But he actually didn't inject stem cells. It was just a fat graft. So this wasn't a stem cell procedure. There were some other unusual things done. And so we've looked at, there are papers that say that there were other stem cell problems. And I won't go through all of this, but in every case that there's a guy at Stanford, a very smart guy, who drills holes in people's heads and injects stem cells into the brain to treat strokes. Very smart man doing good work. So one of these patients had a seizure. Well, this isn't from the stem cells. This is from drilling a hole into the brain, and that can happen. So things like that. So you differentiate what is an actual bona fide stem cell treatment, and there was almost nothing. As I say, it is, and that's not to say that people shouldn't be counseled as to risks. If you're going to get stem cells injected in the lumbar disc, which we're doing, or if you're going, into other areas, the eye, we have a very good ophthalmologist who's going to start doing that. You have to say there are risks of the injection, but that's true of anything. But are these stem cell risks? They're not. And again, nothing to do with fetal or embryonic. We don't use that at all.
Yeah. How would you decide whether you would use someone's own stem cells or from, a donor, say? It's called mesenchymal?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's a fluid field, and we read the literature constantly. We have 17 protocols. We're getting a couple others up on clinicaltrials.gov. And every one of those was extensively researched to read everything in the literature, and we're continually updating it. So the answer to your question is that the first stem cells that were discovered were in bone marrow. So people started using cultured bone marrow in the early 2010s. It was kind of a logistical thing. And then people discovered that there were more stem cells in adipose tissue. And so people started using fat. Or you can take your own fat, and we did these, and digest it with an enzyme. We don't do it so much anymore. We had difficulty getting enough cells for systemic disease. It was okay for arthritis. So the answer to your question is, we read. I know most of the people, I think, doing good work in this field. I talk to people, we read the literature, and the field evolves. So I said, when in 2017, when we went to Nassau, the stromal vascular fraction, where digest fat was something that was being used a lot. And I didn't know if I trusted allogeneic cells from somebody else. So I didn't do it. Everything we do, by the way, is something that somebody else has done first. We're not interested in experimenting on people,
Yeah.
So,
and that's great. That's great.
yeah, well,
So that makes sense. I think we're going to go to a quick break. You're listening to the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. When we come back, we'll be talking more about stem cell therapy with Dr. Prodromos. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back on the Dr. Diane Show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. I am talking today with Dr. Chadwick Prodromos, founder of the Prodromos Stem Cell Institute. You can learn more about him at www.thepsci.com or www.theforum.org. So thanks for being with us today,
Sure.
Dr. Prodromos. We were talking about why you would choose someone's own stem cells versus a stem cell from a donor, let's just say.
By the way, can I interject? The forum has a funny spelling. It's the FOREM.org. But
gotcha. Yep.
So why would I? So what I started to say was some of it was logistical, and if we all kind of discovered together that fat was a little easier, we thought, and people were using allogeneic cells, but I wanted to wait till the report. So what happened was in the late teens, there were good reports from Asia and elsewhere showing good results. So I became a believer, and there are advantages to using these cells. One is that to use your own fat or bone marrow, you have to take a biopsy of that tissue, and it has to be grown outside the body and brought back. So, lipoaspiration, bone marrow aspirate, it's not horrible, but it's not fun. And then the other thing is that because these allogeneic cells can be mass produced, they're actually less expensive. So it's cheaper to use these. And these are paid for by patients, so cost matters. We try hard to keep costs down, so they're cheaper. And then finally, these cells are more metabolically active. So if you're getting somebody else's umbilical cell from a newborn term after a term cesarean section, they're just more active than getting your own cells if you're a 60-year-old with rheumatoid arthritis or something. And most importantly, studies showed efficacy, they showed safety. We closely investigated the immunologic aspects and found that there are no rejection phenomena. So when it became clear to me that these looked better based on the literature, we transitioned over. We still offer, actually, we're the only clinic, any place that I know of, that offers other kinds of treatment as options, but we almost all the time use the umbilical cells for those reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I'm imagining people are wondering, and you briefly touched on a few conditions, but what are the different conditions that you treat with stem cells? And do any, are any more viable than others, or, is it all pretty much you're finding huge success with pretty much any of the people that you work with?
And so what we do is we have what we call efficacy files. So my research people go through, and they go through hundreds, thousands of papers. And there aren't that many trials out there in general. And we find where there's been efficacy, and we create files. And many times there's anywhere from 5, 7, 8, 10, 12. The heart, there's about 40. The efficacy is variable. So what can you treat? So let me explain something about these stem cells. They do basically two things. They have growth factors that help tissue heal, damaged tissue, but they also help block your immune system. They are, the buzzword here is immunomodulatory. So they work best in autoimmune conditions like MS. They're extremely reliable for MS, rheumatoid arthritis. These are conditions where your body obviously attacks itself. Crohn's disease, scleroderma, lupus. Now, what's interesting is that there are many disorders that you don't think of as autoimmune diseases, but are characterized by a low-grade autoimmune inflammatory response. So like osteoarthritis. We see people, there are millions of people running around with bone-on-bone knees with no pain. Most people don't know this, but we orthopedists know this. Why do some people get pain and not others? Well, it turns out that some people's bodies mount an inflammatory response against these joints. So we inject these cells into arthritic joints. We also inject them intravenously. So they downgrade, they modulate your immune system from attack mode to repair mode. They have anti-inflammatory cytokines, which block pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. There are many disorders that you wouldn't normally think of as autoimmune that are, and in those disorders generally helpful. Autism disorder. Now, what is autism? But I didn't know that much about it. It's this crazy thing that does all these strange things. Well, it turns out that mesenchymal stem cells are consistently, reliably effective for autism. And when I say that, it's not everybody, and not everybody gets a great result. But I'm saying most of the people getting a good result. Well, it turns out autism is definitely, we now know, an autoimmune disorder. Your body makes antibodies against its own myelin sheath. It's been described as an allergy to the brain. So your body does attack itself. And once you understand that, you understand why mesenchymal stem cells should be useful for it. Same with cerebral palsy. It actually has efficacy for erectile dysfunction. Why? Because it promotes vasodilation of the blood vessels. So you see, you can't just figure it out on theoretical grounds. You have to just look at studies that have been done, and that's what we do. Diabetes. Type 1 diabetes makes sense. It's an autoimmune disorder, and it's effective against type 1, but it's also effective against type 2. I'm not sure that I totally understand. It's somewhat effective for ALS. It's not great, but drugs do nothing. And it has been shown the technique that we do with these umbilical cells. There was a study in Poland that we exactly copied. Umbilical cells by lumbar puncture, and they increased survival from about 600 days to about 1,100 days. So 500 days extra survival. That's a lot.
Wow.
Maybe in that time we'll find a cure. So inflammatory arthritides. It's psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, Crohn's arthritis. It's good for nerve palsies, facial nerve palsy, trigeminal neuralgia, some efficacy for TBI, traumatic brain, not quite as much, not as well shown. So then you say, well, geez, you're saying it works for everything, right? So what doesn't it work for? Well,
why exactly? Because when you think about it, it's stem cells. And when when you're born, it's almost like you have, with the exception of things like autism and people who have these autoimmune disorders, the average person has really no issues because all of their stem cells are intact.
Yeah. Well, and the stem cells stay intact. It's their immune systems that get deranged. So, severe arthritis. We did a lady who had horrible shoulder arthritis, and shoulder replacement, maybe not the world's most reliable operation. They were kind of deformed. She had almost no motion. We injected her, and she doesn't have much more motion, but her pain was dramatically reduced. We see this with, bone-on-bone joints. So, arthritis as well. So Alzheimer's disease, we get lots of calls for that. But it turns out that for advanced Alzheimer's, it does very little. So we tell people, look, it's just, don't waste your money. We had a lady who, and by the way, if there are unusual disorders, we research them and see. Just last week, a doctor called with a history of encephalomyelitis, like a brain inflammatory thing, and was left with some deficits. Not horrible, but significant. We looked, we could find nothing. So there's dead brain in there. Might it help? Yeah, maybe, but I don't really like doing this on just maybes, But for all these other disorders, it's remarkably effective. I probably left, retinal disease, which is starting to do, spine disorders. So there is evidence that it can help regrow lumbar discs. Now, I want to stay away from the regenerative aspects because is it growing new tissue? Not so much yet. This will probably be happening in the future. But there is some evidence it can help regrow lumbar discs. You can do it in the facet joints of the back. So it's very good for that. There's another one I was going to mention, it slipped my mind, but it will come to it.
So what's the process? Let's say someone is seriously considering this for an issue that they have. What is the process? Do they have to come see you? And I know you have offices in Chicago and Naples.
Right.
So they come see you, and then do you do the procedures in Antigua? Kind of just step us through, what the process is.
And by the way, the other one I was trying to think of was chronic kidney disease.
Ooh.
and it has good efficacy for that. And there are a lot of people. We're doing 2 or 3 people in a few weeks with that. If people are in Chicago or if they're in Naples when we're there, we ask them to come in and do that. But we get people from all over the country, all over the world. We're doing a patient from London. We're doing one from Turkey coming up. People find us. So we do remote evaluations with Zoom or something like that at no charge. Our team, so people email us and our team fields the emails. And if it's, something where we just don't do it, they tell them. Otherwise, they talk to them, answer questions. And then if it looks like something that's a realistic possibility, then after they've gone through this, then I get on a Zoom call and I talk to people and we talk for a while and go through and answer questions. We do all of this at no charge. If people then are interested in coming, we make arrangements. There's a consent form we go through. They pay for half of the treatment when we order the cells about 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance. They pay for the other half when they're actually on the island. So Antigua, what about Antigua? And why are we there? We're there because they have stem cell licensure and they're interested in doing this kind of work. So we got licensed. We're there because we need to partner with an existing clinic. And we had a good one in Nassau. We just found regulatory people that were not real responsive, let's just say. And in Antigua, the regulatory people were good. The clinic is a very high-end clinic. This is a doctor who's a native Antiguan who came to the United States, went to Columbia Medical School, did residencies in New York and at Yale, was set up there and was called to come back by the government of Antigua to run their hospital. Very smart guy, is well known. He's the guy, there's a book, these yachts people with these high-end things, and in their book, like, where do you go for medical care? So he's kind of listed. He's just known to be very good. And he's a terrific doctor, very conscientious. We talked and I realized he was the right partner, has a good clinic. So the process is that we talk, if it looks like something that everybody wants to do, you fly down there. There are nonstop flights from Miami, from Chicago. You get a 5 a.m. flight, switch in Miami and go down. There's nonstops from JFK. So right now we're treating on Saturdays and Sundays. We're expanding our operation. So you fly down a day in advance, get it done. If it's just intravenous cells for diabetes or kidney disease, you can fly down on a Friday, get treated Saturday, go home Sunday. If you're getting joints injected, joints get sore. They get really pretty sore the first day afterwards. Second day, they're better. So we suggest people stay for a day or two afterward. We have an agreement with a terrific resort. It's called Haydens Bay. It's COVID quarantine friendly. So you go to the airport, you go to the resort. You don't leave the resort except to go to the clinic and go back. You need a test 3 days before, an RT-PCR. You need a rapid test, which you provide on the way back. The resort has 2 very nice restaurants. It's right on the water. It's a great clinic. It's a nice resort. It's a seamless experience to get there. I stay there myself. I am in solo practice, so I am accessible. I know that there are increasingly phone banks and difficulties finding people, but we are always accessible if there are issues. We really haven't had any. We follow people up afterwards. We go through medical records. These are studies. So we get data on people before, we get data afterwards. They fill out questionnaires, we get lab tests, because we want to generate publishable data to see, what we're actually doing. So we follow people up 1 month, 6 months, a year, 2 years afterwards. Does the treatment need to be repeated? People ask. The answer is most of the studies that have been done have at least 1 year follow-up. We just haven't been doing it long enough to have follow-up studies. So is it a permanent cure for these things? Probably not.
Right. We don't know. We're going to take a short break. We're on the Dr. Diane show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. I'm talking with Dr. Prodromos, founder of the Prodromos Stem Cell Institute. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back on the Dr. Diane show with me, Dr. Diane Hayden. I am talking today to Dr. Chadwick Prodromos of the Prodromos Stem Cell Institute. You can find out more information about him and his amazing institute at www.thepsci.com. So before we finish for today, I want to talk about the exciting stuff for the future. Not that this conversation hasn't been completely fascinating already, but what do you see as future developments on the horizon for stem cell treatment?
Well, I'll tell you. And so, one thing I didn't mention is anti-aging. And there was a gigantic industry of people who want to do things to live longer, live better, live forever, right? And so we try to, and how do you know? So we don't hype this, but I will tell you that these cells, we did a gentleman who was an ex-Marine who had physically very muscular, lifted weights in his body, which is very inflamed. And we did him and he felt his whole body getting better. He had increased vitality. So, in the anti-aging world, functional medicine, and I know you deal a lot with this, diet, the microbiome, all that is huge. This is a supplement to that. By the way, I should tell you that we get people, in addition to trying to avoid surgery, we get people off of all drugs. So we stop non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. They mask pain, they interfere with healing, they cause ulcers, kidney problems. So Motrin, Advil, Aleve, diclofenac, meloxicam, all those things. We stop all of those. We stop painkillers. If you're taking heart drugs, that's just fine. So as to the future, where we are now, we are using sort of what I would call vanilla stem cells. These are generic mesenchymal stem cells. They do amazing things, but there are really amazing things in the pipeline. For example, you can culture these cells in ways you can culture them in ways to make them, for example, for neurologic disease like MS, ALS, where you make them partially differentiated toward neurons. What happens then is these cells make things called neurotrophic growth factors. These are things that when you damage neurons, actually for MS or whatever, they're exposed to it, they help it heal. Well, these partially differentiated cells do that even more. They make more of these things. There are cells now being developed that can make insulin, that can make L-DOPA for Parkinson's. Even beyond that, there is an amazing doctor in South America who we've been talking to, who is doing things with T cells, where actually, in addition to using the stem cells, you take out your T cells and incubate them in ways that make them less aggressive and put them back. So you can make your body attack itself less with its own immune system. He's done amazing work, has long-term follow-up results that are just kind of off the charts. So getting better with regulating our immune system, getting better with these stem cells. And, people have asked about cancer. Right now, not much going on, but there are things in the future. And the other thing we've hardly talked about, which is what people think of when they think of stem cells, is growing new things. So people say, well, are you going to grow new cartilage in my knee? Well, so far, we have very good results. A majority of the people we see don't wind up needing joint replacements we've got 3-year follow-up study now, many of them longer than that, without growing new cartilage. Now, and by the way, there are bogus x-rays out there, and I've seen them, where they show the before and after with the joint space restored, but they're not real. But that is going to happen. And we're getting better at actually regenerating this tissue. So this is a fluid field, and what's on the horizon is even more exciting. Our results are going to get even better than they are now.
That is just fascinating. And I imagine there's a lot of people listening to this and watching our podcast who may not even necessarily have any kind of a health issue or chronic disease that they need stem cell treatment for, but they are fascinated by the work that you're doing. They want to support the work that you're doing, and they just want to be able to, give back and help people that are in need. So you've set up an actual nonprofit. You have a research foundation, and I wanted you to be able to tell everybody what you're doing with that and how people can get in touch with you, learn more, and potentially support your work.
Thank you. I set it up a while ago, and I have the capacity to generate donations. I never did. I didn't really feel comfortable asking people for money. So I've supported it myself. I've put lots of money into it over the years to pay all these salaries and whatnot, but it kind of just gets to be unsustainable. So we're now actively seeking philanthropy. As I said, I'm not real skilled at doing it, but what I will tell you is that we have no overhead really. I don't take a salary from it. We're not using it to fly to meetings. Basically, it mostly pays salaries of our people. And I will tell you that I know people that donate 7 and 8 figures to universities who are doing great work, But particularly in the stem cell realm, very little of this anytime soon is getting translated into real treatment. In our case, just supporting one of these research salaries, and I've got very bright people, enables us to develop clinical protocols. We would like to be able to treat people that don't have funds to pay for this. We charge less than others, but we have to charge something to pay our bills. So all I can tell you is relatively smaller sums of money can go a long way, and nobody spends this money more efficiently than we do.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that are, like I said, just fascinated, want to learn more about that, want to be able to, support someone who drastically needs this kind of treatment and quite honestly just can't afford it. So
if I could interject too, two things. So the website, probably you're going to get to this, or I guess we already did, but the forum, THEFOREM, the forum.org. There's information there if people are so inclined to where they could donate. The other thing equally important, we have a very useful blog. We just sent one out 2 days ago on stem cells for autism. And so people who are so inclined can sign up with an email. We don't give your email to anybody else, but we send out newsletters and blogs on regenerative medicine too that I think are likely of interest.
Okay, that's awesome. So it's www.theforum.org.
Yep.
And then your institute website is www.thepsci.com.
That's right. The one is
Awesome.
the research arm, the other is the treatment arm, basically.
And I also want to reiterate that you are doing free consultations. So anyone who has a potential health issue that they want to see if this might be a potential treatment for, they can contact you and you'll do a free consultation. Yeah, go ahead.
It's so our foundation, the email is care, C-A-R-E at, wow, is it the PSCI? Let me see. It's I forgot myself. I think it's just PSCI. Care at psci.com. And our phone number, a universal phone number, is 847, if I could, 699-6810. And there are prompts that'll get you to the foundation. And if you go to the website, it's got that information too. But yeah, we're happy to field calls and we answer them all.
Yeah, you've got great information on the website. Also, you have an article coming out in our Essential Naples magazine this fall, which will be out the end of the month of October. And that's talking all about, this amazing world of stem cell treatment and whatnot. Do you think that we just have 1 minute left? I just want to throw out a hypothetical question to you. Do you see that this type of treatment being easier and more accessible in the United States anytime soon? Or do you think it's going to be mostly, offshore for the inevitable future?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be. And there are trials. I think some things are going to be legalized, but even now there are trials that are good, but they're very hard to get into and they have placebo arms. And I think, and I'm not trashing pharma. Pharma does great things, but I think through their prism, they see drugs as what everybody should get treated with and see this as something as a last resort if drugs don't work. In my opinion, it should be a first resort. Actually, I'm fond of saying that these stem cells are like cortisone or prednisone or Humira or Enbrel without side effects. But I just think a lot of well-intended people, I hope it gets more open, but I think it's going to be a very narrow pipeline for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. But, I guess the upside of that is that people get to go to the beautiful Antigua. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Prodromos, and I hope people will be reaching out to you. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the Dr. Diane Show. Please join me every other Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Pacific time. We will be discussing more on the Dr. Diane Show about the power of thoughts and beliefs and the impact they have on your life. Have a great week, and I'll see you back here next time.